Welcome to the Up Next podcast here with Ron, Tim, and Johnny. Today we got some great topics for you. We're talking about MCP. We're also going to cover a little bit on AI builders. And finally, we'll wrap up with what AI means to the job market. So very quickly, MCP. I know, Tim, you started to use some MCP tools recently with Windsurfs. Why don't we start there? Before I give any background on what MCP is, let's just start with what your experience with MCP is, and then we'll round it out a little bit after the fact.
Yeah, so I recently started using Windsurf as opposed to Bolt.new, and kind of one of the things that I didn't like about Windsurf is that, a lot of the things that Bolt kind of automates and just kind of things work together, and you don't even have to think about it. It just does those things. Windsurf does not do. And so I kind of had to either get really good at making those things work myself, or I started looking at like solutions for that and found that some MCP servers do some of that work for you, where it'll connect your, the Windsurf to whatever service I'm trying to use, for example, like Supabase. And so I found that it's still, at least I'm still new to it. And so I haven't quite got every tool that I want. And I've seen on YouTube where people have got like, 20 different tools that they're using, but just connecting Supabase to Windsurf has made a huge difference for me, just because I can tell it, hey, you've got this data set and you got this data set. They're not syncing up, but I need them to work together. And for the, table that I'm working on to work, and basically I can just give it a command on what I want it to do. And because it can connect to it, it goes in there and does a lot of that work for me. So far, that's been like the most useful one. It also, I've got Puppeteer, which allows it to kind of, if I tell it there's a problem with the UI, it can like pull it up, take a screenshot, look at it and be like, oh yeah, I see the problem. And then it'll go through and try to fix whatever problem. So yeah, it's just kind of helped my workflow, because I'm so used to Bolt.new and it just doing everything for me, and it can see everything and, whatever. It's kind of taking Windsurf to feel a little bit more like Bolt did. So it's been nice for me.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. So just a little background on MCP. MCP, created by Anthropic. It's a protocol or a standard that they created back in November. And when they released it, there was a little bit of hype, but nothing really came about it. And then a few weeks ago, there was a talk by one of their developers, and he showed some of the capabilities on it. And that's when it really started getting some traction. The other thing they've done really well, before I talk about what they've done really well, is they've gotten these dev tools, these IDEs, to adopt it. Without the adoption from the IDEs, MCP is still, again, a concept no one talks about. But it's because, Cursor and Windsurf and some of these agent tools have adopted MCP that it's starting to take off. So what is it? Who's the primary user? Because this was something that I was confused with at the beginning. I was like, all right, MCP, cool. What is it? This is a game changer. Exactly what is it? As a user, if you're a regular user of AI, like, on the mobile app or whatever, doesn't mean anything. Doesn't help you in any way. If you're a developer building an application and you call, APIs and, all that stuff, doesn't really help you either. At least not yet in its current form. There are some hacks to try to make it work, but really where it works, where it shines, what its purpose is in its current incarnation, is around this idea that if you have a host application like the Anthropic desktop or Cursor or Windsurf, it's a host application that's hosting your session. You can add MCP to it that allows it to get access to additional things that are not available to it in its default form. So if you're using Claude Desktop, you have access to the model. Maybe it has access to web search, but I don't think it has access by default. But let's just say it's just a black box. It's just the model, and it has access to its data from, whatever the cutoff date is, and that's all it has access to. MCP allows it to, you can say, hey, I want to give it access to this tool. It could be my Google Calendar, or I want to give it access to my local file system, or I want to give it access to my Slack, or I want to give it access to my Airtable that has, a list of places I want to go. Once you've given it access to those things through MCP, it now at runtime can decide when to use those tools and say, oh, you asked me this question. Looks like I have access to this tool. Yeah. I can go and get that information now. And that's actually really powerful. But why it's incredibly powerful with Cursor and Windsurf is because, just exactly as Tim said, it allows you to turn your normal IDE, what developers typically use, which is Cursor or Windsurf, into something that resembles a Bolt or a Lovable, where they have these integrations already built in. For seasoned developers, maybe that's not such a big deal. although I think it'll take them a little longer to trust it, right? Because developers typically, they like the control they have with the tool. They don't want to give up too much control. Whereas newbies, they're all YOLO. They're like, yeah, do everything for me. So they're the ones actually adopting these tools, whereas the seasoned developers are a little more, I think, slower to adopt the tools, including myself, because I don't trust it. It's non-deterministic, right? It's like it's going to do something maybe slightly different each time. Whereas if I'm a developer, I know exactly what I'm going to do when I make that change to the database or whatever. So it does pose some like scary security questions or maybe giving it too much access questions, but it's such a cool idea that you can give it access to really do anything on your behalf. So instead of you having to go, as Tim said, do the migrations of the database or deploy the application or all these things that you would typically do, you could just tell it through the Cursor, Composer tool or Windsurf tool to say, hey, do this changes and then go ahead and deploy it or go ahead and commit this to GitHub or whatever. And it'll do all that for you instead of you having to leave the tool and do all those things on your own. So that's a really powerful concept. And it's actually a really easy protocol to implement. So I think that's also a big leg up. The downside is that it's not across the board protocol that's been accepted. So OpenAI has not accepted or adopted MCP. So if you're using OpenAI as your model in Cursor, maybe it doesn't work as well. But since Claude and Anthropic currently are the best code LLMs, that's why it's working really well on Cursor and Windsurf.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think we'll see some development too on, like, right now Windsurf only has like 4 or 5 options if you go in their like MCP tools. Like there's only a few different options. So anything else like Supabase, I had to go on their site, go to their docs and get like the code to get that server. But I think kind of as people adopt it more and use it more, they'll make it easier for you just a one click and it's already installed on your system, which is nice. So hopefully we'll see some advancement in that just to make that even easier.
Yeah, you got to remember, like you can say, hey, I'm going to add this MCP tool and here's my API key and whatever, but it could be a spoof MCP server.
Wow.
So you got to be careful because there's all these repositories online that list all the MCP servers. There's Smithery, there's Composio, just put one on theirs, and then you can go to GitHub, like awesome MCP tools, and they list a bunch of MCP tools. But anytime you just get things off the internet and add them, you put yourself at risk because there's not really a way to certify that this is a legitimate MCP server for Gmail, for example, because Google themselves has not created an MCP server to my knowledge. So it's always going to be a third party that's doing it on behalf of Google. So those are the kind of things you got to be careful about when you YOLO in this world. But
yeah. So John, for someone that's not in that world, like what do you suggest or what do you do initially? Like what are some steps people can take to try to vet it out or at least, have it kind of check a couple sources before you just commit and go blindly like we would?
Yeah, I mean, that's you got to trust the host of the server itself. So, for example, if you're going with the servers like Composio, I mean, they're a newer company, a little bit of trust there, and you just got to look at the that you're getting the MCP data from their site. But yeah, just look at the source. Who's hosting it? What's the URL of the host of the MCP server, and are they reliable, legitimate, or are they just some random company or URL you've never heard of? I would stay away from those. And then if it's like listed, on the Anthropic side or on the Cursor side, those things, that's going to lend a little bit of credibility as long as it's not something, anyone could add on their own to a directory. If it's something they've vetted and curated, I think that'd be a good thing. But I would start slowly. No matter what, I would just start with 1, 2. I know Tim's added like 6 in the last 2 days.
I think it's 4, but like 3 of them were like Windsurf. You could just click on them to add them. And I figured if Windsurf put it in there, I'm probably safe there. The only one that I personally had to go on and add was Supabase, which again, Supabase I've been using. I trust them. So I did that. But yeah, I've been looking at different ones and I'm like, I don't want to pull the trigger on any of these because I just don't know enough about whoever put it out there. So yeah, that's something I've been careful about, which, usually I'm a YOLO, just go for it. But yeah, I've been a little more careful.
There's actually something called YOLO mode in Cursor. I don't know if it exists in Windsurf. You know how like when you're using MCP, it's going to say something like, "Are you sure you want to use this MCP?" And it says like allow once or allow always. Claude Desktop does that as well, but they're always asking you before they reach out to a third party and send data. In Cursor, you can set YOLO mode, which basically means like just bypass that and just do whatever you want.
Yeah, Windsurf doesn't It's I mean, it does ask every time you want to do a certain thing, and you can bypass that as well. But yeah, I just keep that on because I like to keep track of what it's doing, even though 9 times out of 10 I'm just like, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, they're probably behind the scenes thinking, guys, I don't know, this user here is YOLO, and every time he's the quickest clicker here. We gotta launch this soon. We gotta use
Yeah.
it.
So just to recap, who it's for is if you're a developer in Cursor, Claude, in Cursor or Windsurf, or Cody, there are a couple other IDs. MCP is great if you want to give more control to the database, to GitHub, to Slack, to Google, to your file system. Give it more access to do more on your behalf, as Tim did to Puppeteer to take screenshots. You can give it more access, and then you're sort of more productive in the chat, the composer window. That's one scenario. If you're like an analyst and you do a lot of dealing with external tools and local tools and databases, you can add MCP tools to Claude Desktop to then allow you to have access to and do things on your behalf as well. So I think those are the two primary use cases. I know it evolve over time. The use cases will grow. We'll see if because OpenAI recently released 3 new tools into their primary API. They created a new API called the Responses API that replaced their previous API called Chat Completions. And this Responses API now has native access to 3 tools, which are web search, file access, and a third one I forgot which one it was. But basically, they're kind of like poor man's restricted, limited MCP, right? And so MCP is actually a much better way to go about it. I don't know that OpenAI will admit to that and adopt it, but I sure hope they do for the betterment of the community and the ecosystem.
Yeah. Is there a possibility that they would develop their own protocol? Is that what you think could happen?
It's possible. Yeah. I mean, and even beyond, MCP and what OpenAI has done, there's a ton of AI companies that have adopted other sort of protocols on how to do function calling. There's something called, there's a company called Wildcard, wild-card.ai. And I think they're the ones that created this tool called agents.json, which is kind of in the same ecosystem about figuring out how to call external tools. So there's a lot of tools and a lot of ways people have been going about how do we get these LLMs to interact with third parties. And I think MCP is one of the cleanest, best, most sort of widely adopted ones. Again, there's going to be different areas we need to have standards, but right now it's just kind of the Wild West. There's just so many competing standards and approaches, and we'll see who wins.
For sure.
Very cool. It was just surprising to learn that this launched in November, and it took this amount of time to explode.
Yeah, especially in the AI world, that's like ages.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so there was a demo someone did about driving a self-driving car to something that through MCP that really got the people thinking about the possibilities. But I would go in and watch there's it's almost like a 2-hour talk by the developer behind MCP. It's a really good talk. I think that's worth watching because that's kind of what kicked off this sort of renewed hype about MCPs. But worth to watch.
Very cool.
Cool. So I mean, we kind of already were talking about it, but let's get into this. AI builders. Tim has, I think you've dabbled in 2 or 3 builders now, maybe more. So you've been trying them all, kind of seeing which one resonates with you. And I think part of it is you've actually chosen the right tool based on where you were and your understanding. And as your understanding got better and your knowledge got deeper and your comfort level got deeper, you sort of graduated to the next step that required maybe another level of understanding. And I'd love to hear about your journey in terms of where you started and where you transitioned, where you're at now, and whether you think you're going to stay there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I really feel like I started with the simplest and then worked my way up and, I've just progressed. V0 was kind of the first thing I ever played around with, which I feel like is kind of, a very, very basic no-code tool or AI code tool. And then honestly didn't play around with that for too long. It just felt like a little too simplistic. Like I could do this myself, even though I couldn't. But the stuff it was putting out was just, I wasn't super impressed. And so when I found Bolt.new, I was like, okay, this feels more like, professional and it's actually putting out good code. And the stuff, even though it's, really a prototype of whatever you're building, it still felt better, it more polished, and like it had more tools. So I played around with that for quite a while, burned so many tokens, tried to do different, apps and whatnot. And then I just started hitting a wall there because my projects would get so big that I was burning tokens like you wouldn't believe. I was like, this isn't, I mean, I know that, paying a developer to do it is still significantly more expensive. But for me, I was just like, man, I'm spending hundreds of dollars here and still not getting where I want to get. And I've noticed the larger that my project got, the faster I was burning through tokens. And so, I've been wanting to get into either Windsurf or Cursor or something like that. So I talked to you a little bit about it. And I honestly was leaning more towards Cursor, but I did watch a podcast where they were talking about how Windsurf kind of knows where it's at in your code more. I don't know how to explain that better, but, it kind of understands the whole project as opposed to just whatever section you're working in. And so I was like, I kind of like that because I jump around a lot and I'll see a problem with something and I'm like, okay, let's fix that. And then, okay, now let's go over to this and whatnot. So I thought that would work better for kind of the way that I'm doing things so far. So it was a little scary first starting out because I'm like, you got to install a few different things. You've got to, kind of use the terminal and stuff like that you didn't have to do in any of these other tools. And so, it was a little bit of at first I was like, what did I do? I should just stick with Bolt, But I knew that it was a better tool and like actually what developers use. So I was like, man, if I really want to keep progressing and learning and getting better at this, I feel like I got to use, better tools. So that's what kind of kept me going. And now that I've been doing it for a little while, I'm like, man, I don't know how I ever did Bolt. It feels so much more natural to do it this way. And like I was telling Ron, like $15 is all I've spent so far for Windsurf. And I mean, I've gotten further than I ever did in Bolt and I spent hundreds of dollars there, so it's like you pay for that all in one system and simplicity where this, you got a few more things you got to do and there's some setup and whatnot. But man, once you kind of get going, it's significantly better. As far as moving on to something else, I honestly don't know what the next step would be. So I'm pretty happy with where I'm at.
And just for clarification, you said you've been using Windsurf for a while. How many days was that exactly?
Like 4 days.
Now, Ron, Tim convinced you. He really, went at it to sell you on, hey man, you got to use Bolt. You got to come over to the Bolt side, and you finally relented and came down. It's a Bolt, and then he left.
He did. He abandoned me, man, for something better.
So what is your thinking? You think you're sticking with Bolt, or has he made a convincing argument to maybe you'll deal with the pain and learn a little bit more for the reduced costs and more powerful features or capabilities?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, it's only been 4 days, so we'll see how the next 4 days play out. But it's cool. It's honestly, to be in my position, I'm lucky, right? I have two other people, you both, that are in that world and are experimenting and trying all these tools. So it's pretty cool, right? Because I can explore with some tools, but also hear from you guys. In this case, Timmy kind of jumping ship. I'm learning, he's sharing what he's going through, and I get to get a preview of it, and before I make a decision, right? And so it's a good spot to be in. It's not bad at all, right? To be in a group and a network that can explore different tools that are available. And as you guys know, these tools are just like developing. They're launching so quickly. New things are launching every week, right? And improving too. The tools that exist keep improving, and so it's tough. It's tough to decide, which sucks. Someone like me, I'm a bit indecisive. It is challenging because I'm like, man, like you said, I spent weeks kind of making a decision on which tool to use, right? And that's not a good thing. So, but it is cool to kind of hear from Timmy on like what his experience has been as a beginner, and also be able to compare with Bolt, which he's recently been using, and get a preview before I make a decision to jump ship. But yeah, it certainly sounds appealing, and I know that it's had quite a bit of hype over the last month or so on X. So, I read those threads, and but again, so many threads that hype up different tools, right? That it's like, oh, the next day there's a new tool that's getting hyped. For now, I'm sticking with Bolt, Timmy, but I'll check in a few days and see how things are going, and we'll see.
Yeah. And for those wondering, the Windsurf Cursor, 90% the same thing. Again, the key difference is what Tim mentioned, is that the amount of context in Windsurf, it's the complete context versus in Cursor, you have to provide the context, which again, it goes back to this whole idea that developers or seasoned developers, people who have been developing for a while, they probably prefer the Cursor way because they want to be in control. They understand everything. They understand every file, what's going on in every file, because they probably created or they want to be in full control. So, but I think for new developers coming over from Bolt, I think Windsurf is actually probably the better tool to go with because of that. And then also once you can start using the MCP tools, you can make your Windsurf or Cursor feel and act a lot closer to Bolt today than was even possible 2 months ago, where you didn't have any of those capabilities yet. So I think it's probably going to be a bit of a damaging time for Bolt and some of these online tools, because the cost, as Tim said, can get up there versus, Cursor. I pay the $50 a month, and I've never come close to using all my available tokens. That's as a full-time developer,
Right,
I haven't
right.
come close to using my tokens. So, it's a very cost-effective solution.
Very cool.
Awesome. All right. Well, so we'll wrap up here with our last topic, which is, for some people out there in the job market, might be one of those topics that you're facing on a day-to-day basis today, which is, what are the job prospects like today for those in search, in light of the economy, but also in light of AI? I'll start just with a little anecdote that I have, in that there's a website called built in Chicago, built in Austin, and those sites tend to have a lot of job listings for tech jobs, whether they're sales or customer service. They're always around like startups and techno companies. And normally, and I've always hired from there. When I had my startup or worked at companies, I've always hired from built in because it tended to help curate really high quality people. I've noticed recently that there's not that many jobs being listed on built in, which is kind of a scary signal if we're just kind of looking at general signals. The fact that there's not as many jobs there today as there were a year, 2, 3, 4 years ago. So, and then just from my personal experience of knowing founders, knowing, executives of companies, it seems like everyone's calibrating right now. Like, people are scared to hire, or they're trying to figure out, what does AI mean to my job? What will I have? Do I even need more people? I don't want to hire more people if I'm not going to need them because of AI. No one really truly has a good sense of it. And so I think that's part of it too, is a lot of hesitation. And then obviously the economy, with everything going on there, and the stock market falling and rates still high, I think there's a little apprehension to hire and spend big. That's just sort of my anecdote. I know, Ron, you've got a lot to say about this topic, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I don't know if I have a lot to say, but I would say what you're describing, your perspective, I think is accurate, is aligned with what I'm seeing as well. I think you're right. It's not just AI, but it's also the political climate, right? So the economy, the politics, regardless of what side you're on, and then you layer in like AI and the technology that's just advancing at a rapid rate, and so many unknowns and so many questions. Yeah, it's certainly I don't know that we've ever gone through a time like this, ever. So yeah, I think companies are certainly being more conservative. They're tightening down for sure. The job market is a complete mess. Yeah, I'm spending more time there and just seeing, like, it's unreal. Like, there's layoffs almost daily, in the thousands in various industries, and there's just not enough work, not enough jobs. So yeah, it's ugly for sure. And in terms of, what I see, kind of navigating healthcare, healthcare seems to be hot right now. And I don't know, kind of as I think about it, like, I think in the next decade or two, I think healthcare is just going to be on fire, man. Even with AI, right? Like, with technology, like, I think healthcare is just going to continue to boom. But yeah, a lot of unknowns in technology and manufacturing, in our food and CPG world, a lot of questions. I mean, right now CPG is just getting wrecked. Most companies, obviously you have the outliers that are doing well or cashing out right now. But yeah, in general, just there are no jobs, almost no jobs right now. They're all tightening up, no open positions. And so yeah, so it's interesting. I think a lot of companies are in that, and a lot of leadership are in that position where they don't know what's happening. So they'd rather not make any major moves right now. They're playing it, real conservative.
Well, and it makes sense because, like, when 6-8 months ago, these tools would help you kind of like maybe 2x. And with the advancement of them and how much better they've gotten and things like MCP and all of these different things, now you're xing people's ability or maybe not 100x yet, but I mean, you can see the progression, going. So it's like, yeah, why would companies be hiring more people right now? Because they're like, the people we have are getting that much better at doing what I need them to do. So I'm going to hold off and see how much better this stuff gets before I invest in more personnel. So,
well, the thing is that, if you look at most big companies, none of them are actually benefiting from any of this yet.
Yeah.
At best, they might have a Azure-based, LLM access for the company that is like a model behind, but they're not really building with AI yet. The developers aren't allowed to use Cursor or any of these tools. Will they even be capable of, because they might be millions and millions of lines of code and it might not work as well in those scenarios. So I don't think AI is actually having a big disruption on big companies and established companies. I think the people who are benefiting the most are startups and small companies.
Startups, yeah.
The ones that are actually utilizing it.
Yeah.
But you look at the jobs report. The jobs report says that we haven't really lost that many jobs. We're still growing, and there's a disconnect there. I don't know what jobs are being created. As Ron said, anything regulated is probably still growing. So healthcare is very highly regulated, so they're probably fine right now. And then government, right? The government was always hiring, but now we're starting to cut back, through Doge. So maybe it's a lagging, maybe it's not a true number yet.
Yeah, so I have it here. So in February, the U.S. added 151,000 jobs. It was slightly short of expectations.
Mm.
But yeah, but one thing, to your point, I mean, generally it's doing okay. Like it's not in that danger territory yet. But one thing that I noticed is the consumer confidence. So consumer confidence declined in February. So spending is down, which again, I think it's just parallels what we're seeing right in general with things. And then the other thing, another interesting stat that I read about was AI jobs, right? Which, is a little off topic, but in the latest job report, 1 out of 4 tech companies are hiring for AI roles. So 1 out of 4 open job listings from tech companies are for AI roles, which is a huge increase. It was like between 6-8%. On average from like 22 to early 24. So pretty drastic jump, pretty sharp spike. But again, that's in the tech industry. But I agree with you, John, that I don't know that AI has played a role yet in big corporations, especially like publicly owned companies. Like there's so many layers, so many approvals and then
so many meetings.
So many meetings, yeah, to talk about meetings. And then also you think about the age group, right? The age of a lot of the leaders in those companies, they have no idea what's going on right now. Like they truly don't. And if they do, it's maybe because they have a teenager or, a young son or daughter that's making them aware of what's going on. But in general, I think they're way, way behind.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you. I think it's going to take some time for us to see any changes there or any, effect with AI, those bigger companies. But still, with AIs and with startups, like, you can see some, who knows, in the next 1 to 2 years, like there might be some big disruptions that we're not aware of yet.
I'd be curious what they define as AI jobs, right? Because 3 years ago, an AI job was someone that could, create models. And then, 1 year ago, I was like, well, we don't need creative models anymore because we have great models from, the big guys. So, you just need to know how to use the AI, leverage it, in development. But now, it's almost like, no, you just need to know how to like use the models, through ChatGPT or, through workflows or agents, So I wonder, I'm really curious what they define as an AI job, because it seems like it's gotten broader over time, because more and more is being done for you by the open AIs and the Claudes, where you don't need that specialized talent as much anymore.
Right. Yeah, I'd imagine at this stage, I mean, I've seen some AI roles and positions, and they're very general like roles. Like they haven't clearly defined what they're doing when you read into it. So it's interesting. It's almost like they just want to bring in someone with AI knowledge and experience, and then they'll figure it out later, like what they'll use them for, what they'll utilize.
Curious to see what those people's skill sets actually are. They're like, yeah, I've used an LLM, so I'm good. and like if they have no clue, like how are they going to vet them?
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
us as users of the tool, I think we can, the human side apart, right? Because the humans are always going to be slow to adopt, and there's always the politics of the office. But we see the potential of LLMs, AI, and agents in the workplace for office type work. But I'm curious, Tim, you have a lot of background experience in the construction world and more the services world of, housing. How do you see that world evolving in terms of, does AI have an impact today? Will it have impact over the next few years? And where and when does it have an impact, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, the construction industry as a whole is kind of slow to adopt anything new because, they're pretty risk averse. Because, I mean, if you think about it, you can have one bad project that'll wipe out the profits from 10 good ones. You know what I mean? So it's like you have to be real careful and keep things that work, keep working them. And I mean, the other thing is with everything being so manual and hands on, AI isn't going to make a huge difference there. I think every CRM that's out there for construction or takeoff tool where you have to quote out a job and they have plans and all that stuff, everything's already using AI to make that quicker. But for a lot of construction, remodelers, stuff like that, they don't have plans. They go through, they may have a CRM or some kind of app that helps them organize their bids and stuff. But, for the most part, a lot of that stuff's still really manual. And a lot of it too is like intuition of like, you've done this before, the things that might come up during it and whatnot, where, LLMs aren't trained on any of that. They can't use data they don't have. So I don't think there's going to be a huge adoption for the construction industry anytime soon. I'm sure things will advance and get better, and there will be more and more use for it. But I think right now, as it sits, I think it's going to be slow to get into those industries. What I'm hoping kind of happens is with less people needed in like developers and stuff like that, maybe more people will go into trades and stuff like that, because it'll be so competitive in these markets that we'll see more people going into trades, because there's a huge labor shortage in the trades and skilled trades and stuff like that. So hopefully that kind of helps that.
Yeah. So I'm curious, I don't have a background in construction, but I always envision a world where you would have these like specialized robots. So for example, if you were going to lay down, bathroom tile, right, that the robot would know, hey, this is the material I'm using, and they would know how to lay down the thing and kind of like, because it could scan, the size and make sure, everything's appropriate. It might not cut it. Maybe it could cut it. Who knows? But that there were these specialized robots that can do some of those tasks that are very labor intensive.
I think it could happen. I think what's going to happen, though, is robots are going to have to build pretty much everything, because part of what comes into the construction world is a good, let's say, carpenter, right? A good carpenter, as opposed to like an inexperienced one, is knowing what to do when things aren't perfect, right? You don't have that perfect square. It's not perfectly plumb. It's not, whatever. People that have experience, they know how to deal with that, and they know how to make adjustments, and they know how to cut things different, and they know how to scribe things and whatever. Whereas, like, if everything's not perfect, I don't think robots are going to be to the point where they can handle those situations, even with like LiDAR or, whatever you would think you would use to kind of correct those things. I think it would take quite a bit of, development to get it to where it could handle those situations and know what to do for each individual situation.
I was going to say on that comment. So it's funny. I was looking at, I don't know if you guys have seen Gemini Robot. So they put out a video, Tim, where they're training their robots for a situation much simpler, more basic, of course. But basically there's fruit laid on a table and they have 3 different types of containers, and they are trying to confuse and trick the robot. So to your point, like what does it do when it's not as simple to, like, it says pick up the banana and drop it in the clear container. And as it picks up the banana and goes to drop it, the guy starts to move the containers around the table. He like switches them around, moves them around, and the robot pauses, and it actually waits and finds the clear container and follows it until he sets it, and then it drops it in the clear container.
Yeah.
So it's advancing kind of quickly.
Yeah,
It's
but I
kind of
mean,
mind
still, at
blowing.
the end of the day, that's like such a simple task where it's like,
True.
this house was built in 1930. Every wall in it
Right.
is
Right.
like this. You know, it's
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
are the
It's
kind of
just so
things.
complex. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's it's now you've got this problem and the floor is also unlevel, and there's just
Totally.
so many
Totally. There's so much.
complexities that I just feel like it's going to be a while before they get to the point where. And I've seen
Yeah.
I think there's like robot roofers already out there. I mean, they're not robots, but they're kind of
Wow.
like on tracks and it can lay down the shingles pretty quickly. I'm sure some of that stuff's going to be okay, especially in new construction. Because, like I said, if you can know that the foundation's really good, I think in new
Yeah.
construction we'll see
In an
more and
ideal
more of it.
situation, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but in the realm of like remodel or rework or any of that kind of stuff, I think it's going to be a
There's
long
so
time
much.
before
Yeah.
it's able to handle those more complex
And
situations.
and it almost reminds me, John, of what you said from your perspective on technology and coding, right? With your experience, where you said like coders, they want complete control, right? Because they're experienced, they're experts, they want complete control. I almost feel like it applies to construction as well, right? They have that control, and it's like you're giving up some of that control and trusting that the robot will be able to do the same quality work, right? And understand those complexities and then do it properly and correctly.
Yeah. There's so many parallels between coding and building homes. And again,
Yeah.
the meme I sent you earlier, if you get the foundation wrong, you're screwed.
The whole thing is messed up. Yeah.
There's so many things that go wrong once the foundation is wrong. I love that when people are getting the product, but it's not really real in the fact that they're not going to be able to scale that product to a lot of people. They got to rebuild it 3, 4, 5 times. And code is great because rebuilding is easy and fast, especially now with LLMs. Before it was a little more painful, but today it's so super fast. Rebuilding a house is not easy and fast. It's very expensive. So that's even a higher degree. A couple of things are with Tesla, right? In a lot of these self-driving cars, they were able to have cars driving many, many years ago, and they were perfect under controlled circumstances. But where they failed as when someone jumped out in the middle of the street, when a dog, was there when the light never turned green after being red. Like there's so many scenarios where we as humans can interpret, we're like, oh, I'll just do this, or I'll just go around this car. Whereas a Tesla car hasn't been trained on that, doesn't know what to do, right? And so what Tesla does is it just uses all the experience of real drivers and say, oh, okay, real drivers did this, and sometimes it's not legal, so they have to label that data to make sure, like, hey, don't do this. This is good, this is not good. And similarly, NVIDIA, right? They have this sort of system with robots called digital twins, where they're going into these factories and they're saying, hey, we're going to watch the workers do the job, and there are training data. We're learning based on what the workers are doing, and that's how we're training the robots, because these things are imperfect. Sometimes things go wrong, and we're learning from what people do so that the robots can learn. We can train them with that data so that they also know how to deal with imperfect situations. And I think this housing scenario is very similar. Is like the hard part is getting the training data, because humans make these decisions, just like with code. Like there's so much code, and we didn't train with the perfect code. We train with all kinds of codes in all different scenarios, so that the LLMs have gotten pretty good at finding ways to fix things and do things. It's just harder to get that data because you have to train on video data, and that data is just not easy to come by. But that's why I talk about it being a constrained system. You're not going to teach them how to build a whole house, but maybe you teach them how to lay down this kind of tile, this model tile that has these characteristics on this floor, but it has to be even, and you need to have the blueprint or the what do you call it, the polycam of it just and it needs to run a course and say, hey, is this the measurements I think? And then maybe I think you could do a pretty good job. And for someone like you, Tim, who this was your world before, you can inspect the foundation, be like, this is good, cool, I don't have anyone who can lay down tile, I'm going to put this robot here that cost me ours to rent, or maybe you bought it and you can use it over and over again, but it's going to do that job and that job only really well. And so like for certain jobs, I wonder if that's kind of where we start, is for very specialized jobs where the constraints are defined, and where you have someone that can sort of verify that everything is in place before you put the robot on it.
Yeah. And I almost feel like maybe where we see it first is in like new home builds, right? Or like new apartment complexes, right? Where you're just repeating the same 1 or 2 designs throughout, multiple floors. And maybe that's where we'll see kind of some disruption early on.
Well, I think that's where it's actually going to make the most sense, because, you got, if you're a a bathroom, let's just say even a tile setter in new construction homes, right? You're going to go out, you're going to have to take a robot out to a job. You're going to have to, set it up, do all this different stuff to make it work the way it's supposed to.
Yeah.
And then let it do its thing. And then by the time it's done, you've probably spent as much time as just a guy going out there and doing it. But in an apartment complex where you're like, you job number one, and then we got 700 other ones to do, that's where I think it'll start making economical sense, because it's just moving it from one to the next. And so the setup time and all that stuff will be a lot less. So that's where I feel like it'll start really making sense.
I know we're seeing, I know there was an example of kind of early adoption, right? Is like they have now the lawnmowers.
Yeah.
Those lawnmowers that run like on their own, they scan the property and they just run on their own. So like that's one easy, like quick way they implemented it, but kind of cool.
I've been getting those Temu robot lawnmowers every day recently. I clicked on them just because I was curious. Like they're like $2,500 and they look terrible.
Wow.
I don't think they would do a very good job. I think the technology is going to be really cool when it gets there, but the Temu ones were pretty bad.
Yeah, there are some good ones out there. In fact, there's people creating whole companies where it's pick up and drop off lawnmowers. They get all these accounts and they set up the GPS coordinates to let it know what it's cutting, drop it off, let it go do its thing. It goes, drops off the next one, come pick that one up. So there's whole companies that, are created doing this stuff, which is super smart. And if
it is,
you have the capital investment and are willing to take the risk, I mean, I've seen it work so far. So it's pretty cool.
The next one's got to be I'm sure it exists, but a good one would be the dog poop. The dog scooper.
Yeah.
Because I know there's people that, pay to have people come and scoop the poop in the yard every like week or two. So that should be a pretty easy job for a robot to do, is just scoop that all up, just drop it off, and 20 minutes later, you pick it up.
Absolutely.
That's crazy. What other, like, maybe better, but like, where else do you see that there could be some disruption or opportunities? Like I'm thinking now, like, window washing, which can be pretty dangerous, right? Like when you have multiple stories and stuff like that. Like I'm thinking, is there a way that they can that can be disrupted? I don't know.
I'm sure there will be. I mean, hanging drywall. You know what I mean? Like that would be a great one because it's backbreaking and it's hard to find people that want to do the work. So it's like if you can train a robot to do that, then. And, there are some things that are going to be obstacles. Like, for example, you kind of touch when you're hanging sheetrock. You can feel when something isn't right, like I'm hitting something or I'm not, I shouldn't put a screw there, where a robot may struggle with that. But it's like, I feel like you can overcome those things with like, all right, scan the room first, look for any obstacles that are going to be in your way and don't put screws there, So I think there's plenty of opportunity and it's just going to take a while for us to get there. But I do think a lot of that stuff's going to end up going that way eventually.
Gentlemen, good talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here
quite a
bit.
And it's moving quick, so we'll have plenty more to talk about on the next one.
Yeah,
for sure.
See
All right,
you
it's been good to chat.
All right.